The Bear Roars special edition series, Bandwidth, serves as a platform to celebrate the people and stories of Dan's book. Bandwidth, the untold story of ambition, deception, and innovation that shaped the internet age and the dot-com boom. The story covers the epic journey of the creation of the internet's backbone, the building of the early competitive fiber networks in the 1990s, the bandwidth boom, bust, and resurrection ending in 2020 when Dan's company Zayo was sold. The book is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Head to dan-caruso.com/book for more details. In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan Caruso sits down with Pat Lynch, Executive Managing Director at CBRE Data Center Solutions, for a wide-angle look at the past, present, and future of digital infrastructure. Pat shares lessons from 3 decades in the industry, from MFS and Level 3's rise to steering CBRE's global data center business today. He and Dan reminisce on the bandwidth boom and bust, the wild years that tested telecom's limits, and draw parallels to the AI explosion redefining infrastructure once again. It's a conversation about trust, transformation, and the future of infrastructure at the intersection of data, energy, and innovation. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
Well, Pat Lynch, you have been part of this bandwidth journey for as long as I have, and even longer, because you still stuck with it. So you're going to have some stories to share. I just got to pull them out of you.
I'm looking forward to it, Dan. This will be fun. A lot of stories and maybe a different perspective given my role in real estate and now continuing in the data center space. So yeah, let's do it.
And real estate has been always a key part of our industry. Now it's front and center with the explosion of data centers for AI, and you're going to be able to share a lot of what's going on currently with AI data centers and how that's playing out. But even in the early era, real estate's always been part of the industry.
Yeah, it's the digital infrastructure title is, I think, going to stick and continues to expand and grow. And I might flip the table on you a little bit if we have time, because I'm going to ask some quantum computing questions. You may,
yes,
because I know that's a passion of yours that's coming into the industry, and so we'll see if it gets there. It's your show, but I may have to go there.
Okay, absolutely. And I was actually hosting a panel at Data Cloud in Austin just a couple weeks ago. And what I did with that panel is bring 4 rock stars from the quantum world. A very senior person at AWS, a person who has a big role in quantum at NVIDIA, plus 2 quantum CEOs who are here in Colorado, who are part of the startup ecosystem. So we talked to literally as packed of a room that I've spoken in a long time. In fact, they were packed in the room we were in, and they were packed in an adjacent room that was the overflow room. And I think it was the first deep exposure to the data center world on quantum. So we had
I had some colleagues that were there, and excited to learn more about that over time and maybe talk about it a little bit today.
Absolutely, because there's some profound effects that are going to begin to play out as is relevant to the data center world in particular.
Yeah, for sure.
But let's, the other thing unique about your perspective, and you mentioned this just as we were getting started, is you kind of joined the story from the Omaha perspective, whereas I joined from the Chicago perspective. And the reason I call those perspectives is because we both joined relative to Kiewit and Jim Crow. Yeah. So let's tell your story.
Sure.
Of how you got brought into the industry, acclimated to the industry. So let's go back in time and start there.
Yeah, that's fun to think about. And you've aged a lot better than I have. But man, we've gotten old. So born and raised in Omaha, had a great blue collar background. My father had a plumbing business that he was the worker as well. So I worked for him in college and got out and went to work for a developer, the Lund Company. And in that role, kind of tying back to Omaha, my office mate next door was Howard Buffett, Warren's son. It was a good friend of John's. And it was just kind of that Omaha work ethic. And as I think about our journey.
So your office mate was...
Howard Buffett was a friend of John's, and he would, he drove a pickup truck and would go get a coffee on a Saturday, because we worked Saturdays just like Kiewit and all of us did. And
so what do you mean you worked on Saturdays just like Kiewit? All of us did. I mean, wasn't this like the quiet quitting era that you were?
That was not. It was a different time. You didn't. Saturday was the day that we got ahead of the competition, as I remember, and that legacy continued into MFS. I'm kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent, but I look back now and I value that, right? Because you really did differentiate yourself. So so my journey with Lund, and then
Saturday was a special day. You only have to work half a day.
Exactly. That was exactly the mindset, as you and I both remember. So Lund Company created an opportunity with the bank that Kiewit and the Scott family owned. So in that, I got to meet Walter, and his son David is a good friend of mine still. And then flash forward, the bank gets sold, and the Kiewit guys call me about a headquarters project for a company called...
Can I interrupt for 1 second? So you mentioned David Scott. So I was at a conference last November, December, down in Florida. And there was, one in the morning was kind of a breakfast conversation. They paired you up with people, so it's maybe a 10-person table. And I kind of glanced over 2 seats to my right. The last name was Scott. It was David Scott. I'm like, that's interesting, because it was a conference designed for the clients of the firm. The firm is BDT, and BDT historically has as clients kind of multi-generation families. That's who probably, there's where the origin story was.
Sure.
BDT stands for Byron Trott. Byron Trott was famously known as Warren Buffett's banker when he was at Goldman Sachs for a lot of years. In fact, Warren Buffett made a quote that the only banker he ever trusted was Byron Trott. So when I saw the Scott name, I'm like, I wonder if that's Walter Scott's son, even though he's up there in age. Walter Scott has since passed away. So we're going around the table, and people are just telling what they're doing and who they are and giving their backstory, and it gets to him before it gets to me. And he talks about, Kiewit and Warren Buffett was his mentor, and they got into fiber business, MFS, and then level 3, and then 2 things down. I'm like, boy, do I got some stuff to share with you. And that was right before I released my book. And, I never heard from him after. We exchanged notes, and I can't remember if I sent him the book or sent him notice of the book, because I wanted him to read the book and I wanted him to share the story. So if you're still in touch with him,
maybe we'll make that happen.
Yeah, definitely make that happen. Have him at least flip through the book, if nothing else, because there's a lot of stories in there about Walter Scott and of course MFS and level 3, and would love to get his perspective on that.
Well, and that's part of this, as I reflect, getting the Kiewit opportunity, growing up in Omaha, I think I was, to give you about my academic prowess, I was voted most likely to own a bar in my high school class.
Oh, wow, cool.
I failed miserably at that, but I've done okay.
Yeah, you can still own a bar. You've done well enough that you can throw some money away at a bar at this point.
So that was the Kiewit connection, and
So what was Kiewit in Omaha? Were they a big deal in Omaha?
Oh, dominant, yeah.
So tell people about Kiewit's.
The Kiewit construction, the name, the Scott family name was, and Buffett. I think growing up in Omaha, there's so many just really fascinating things. The philanthropic nature of the people like the Buffetts and the Durhams and the Scotts. It was just part of the community, and I think I just expected that to be the case everywhere. It's not, right? And that allowed us to have amenities, and I'll talk about a project in between MFS and level 3, which was a big project with the University of Nebraska that the Scott family funded. Took down the old racing track, which was going away, and built a campus that's still there today with the University of Nebraska at Omaha and Scott Engineering Building. So to be involved in that was amazing as a blue-collar kid from Omaha. So I've been really fortunate and blessed, and part of my journey is tied back to Omaha and getting to meet people like that, and they drove pickup trucks, right? They didn't drive Ferraris, and they were normal people. When I would go have a beer with David, we'd go to the Onion, which was a dive bar in Omaha, and I think the further I get away from that, the more I value that base upbringing. So
great upbringing, great memory.
Yeah. So Kiewit remains a huge element in Omaha, and built a new headquarters recently. But spent a lot of time at Kiewit Plaza. One of my memories, early stage of level 3, because the Omaha office, we were Kiewit diversified then. I remember getting in the elevator with Mr. Buffett and Mr. Scott, and we got to the bottom, and called my wife at the time and said, I just got out of an elevator and there was billions of dollars in net worth in there. She kept,
Really?
well, I know it's not yours. So, but those kind of things were cool. So Kiewit, Scott family owned a bank, went to work for the bank. It was a great job, really kind of baptism by fire, and traveled mostly around the Midwest. It was an agricultural bank, and ultimately back in that time, so that's what, early 90s, like a lot of banks, we crushed it during the SNL event because we had well-capitalized bank and we're buying things for 10 cents on the dollar. And, it was, as a young real estate professional, we had one scenario where we had, there's 4 corners and 3 of them were banks that we owned at the time, and we sold those off. So it was a great time. Too young to really know how much fun that was. But then the bank got sold, and the Kiewit guys reached out and said, hey, we're doing a headquarters for a company called MFS. It's a world headquarters in Omaha. It's going to be a really cool project. We need somebody, on the owner side to look over it. And had no idea who MFS was. Really didn't know what fiber optics were, Dan, at that time.
Yeah,
and
this was, 80,
this was early 90s now, right? Because
so
you guys had
90.
already started the company. You were crushing it, and we were going to build the headquarters in Omaha, which was fantastic. So I got introduced then to Mike Frank, Doug Bradbury, Jim Crow, Dinah Sink, and went in and did the interview and got hired, and that was the start of my journey, 30-year plus now in digital infrastructure. And gosh, what a great trip that has been. So we got the headquarters built. And I'm going to jump into this, and you cut me off, but it's part of the background. One of the things I remember is I was being recruited by some of the bank executives to go do this project at Exarban, the racing track, and didn't want to go. I was, we got the headquarters done. The team was finding other things for me to do, and I remember having a conversation with Dinah. Said, I really want to talk to Doug or Jim or Mike and, just find out what my future is. And I've rarely bothered them, but if you needed them, they're always supportive all the way through my career, just like you have been. And so I was really kind of upset about it. And so ultimately, I took the job, and it was a great opportunity. And I accepted the job. I had 2 weeks left, and within 3 days of accepting that, the MFS WorldCom merger was announced.
Okay.
And then Jim was gracious enough and said, hey, we couldn't. And, I wasn't at a level like you were that you would have been involved with it. So there's no way they could have told me. But it's kind of, I think.
I don't think I was involved with it. I think if you weren't part of the, corporate infrastructure, they want to keep you focused because, I was, heads down running significant parts of the business, the build out of the networks, the opening of new markets. So in those days, the internet was taking off like crazy, and I had a big role getting the infrastructure for dial-up modems, which was kind of growing like weeds. So it caught me by surprise. I don't think I had any kind of shoulder tap that was coming. Maybe I did a day or two before, but certainly wasn't involved in the process.
So then did that project, got it underway, and almost completed, and then I got the tap on the shoulder about, at that time it was Kiewit Diversified, right? Mm-hmm. And it was same audience, Jim and Doug and Mike and Dinah, and the conversation was, we're going to do this. It's not going to be in Omaha. Here's the 3 locations, and we had the Arthur Anderson study that came in and did a deep dive. So I came in about halfway through that, and ultimately I got hired. I think, as the 102nd employee, and my first role was to build a campus for 3,000 people, right? You think about that now. That was, so that, I'll pause there. The journey's a lot longer than that, and you're a big part of that, but that's kind of the background of it.
Yeah, and the campus recently got sold at an auction, right? I think so.
It went to auction. I don't know that it ever got sold.
Oh, no.
You may be a part of some news that I don't know yet.
No.
Last I knew,
I don't have current information.
Yeah,
I remember it was going to an auction, so I assumed it got sold in an auction. Maybe not.
I don't believe it has. Yeah,
really.
Yeah,
wow.
So it's still a big, beautiful building at the end of interlocking development, and
Jim cared a lot about the design of the building. Like how it was going to be integral to the culture he was trying to create. He was envisioning we were going to be an internet company. Was a big part of his theme, and therefore needed to be designed in a way that would make it, appealing and functional for what was thought to be optimal for an internet company that was going to scale. So tell us about the design process, the design criteria, the philosophy that went into that. Tell us about that building.
Yeah, I mean,
that was a big deal. I mean, that was part of our identity.
So we first had to agree where we're going to go to Colorado. As I remember it, I think it was Silicon Valley, Dallas, Chicago, Denver, and Boston was in there for a while.
Yeah,
those were. And
I remember Boston longer than Dallas, but certainly, I remember there being 4, but my memory was Boston, not Dallas, but maybe it was Dallas.
Well, and the other piece that was fascinating, and maybe part of your next book, but a big element of the study that Arthur Andersen did, and they were Arthur Andersen back then, was it wasn't reaching out to the 45, 50-year-old engineers. It was the newbies coming out of the universities that we all knew we had to recruit from. And we also knew you couldn't go to one university and recruit the volume of talent that we were going to need. So a big part of it was, where will these people move to, right? Where can their spouses find jobs? Where's cost of living, relatively affordable? And, in that environment, like you and I, we wanted to be outdoors and active. And so I think, that study was spot on. I think the location was spot on. I know there was a lot of discussion back and forth about, Meridian, being South Denver, or where we ended up in Boulder. And, you're in Boulder and I was up here for 25 years. I think we made the right call, but that was the background of it. And then when we went to Interlochen, the development we ended up being, it was a new emerging. Sun Micro had just took land down on a huge campus. And one of the last negotiating points was something that was not a negotiating point for Jim. We wanted to be on the far west end. We wanted to be, and the campus is still there, and I think it was a brilliant move. And the developer didn't want to sell that because he wanted to have it progress kind of east to west. And as is usual, Jim won his negotiation, and that's the land. And then we rolled up our sleeves and literally designed the first building and started building it. We didn't really know what the inside was going to look like. I mean, you knew this from your role, right? Everything was, you just couldn't go fast enough, including the campus build. But yeah, Jim was intimately involved in that. It was, I think, he was just a great mentor in a small way to me, because he had way bigger fish to fry. But I always enjoyed it because he would come into those sessions and he'd be very reflective, and he'd get input from Doug and Mike and others. And he'd be relatively quiet. And I don't know, in the meetings you were in, where it was more network related, maybe he was different. But I always ask a couple questions, and then we'd be off and running. And then we'd come back.
One of my favorite things, and I say this with respect, but also kind of just in jest. So the idea was everyone was going to have a 9x9 office. So everyone, including him, was going to have a 9x9 office. So no one was going to be in cubes. They'd all be able to have these sliding doors, which I guess was kind of a tech trend at the time. So even he was going to have a 9x9 office. But when you go to his 9x9 office, he also had a big area outside of his office with lounge chairs and this and that, and a gigantic conference room that it opened up into, and a fish tank. It's like, okay, I guess it's a 9x9 office. But when you open the door, it's kind of a
he had a little overflow space to move
office.
into. Yeah, that was part of the I wanted and if you think about the talent, then it was the engineers, right? It was the people that you were recruiting on your team, and in those days, that talent had 3 or 4 different offers. So we wanted a great location. We wanted to be able to tell them you're going to have an office with the door to shut.
It worked.
I think it did. Yeah. And then we had the courtyard area. He was very specific about how the courtyard looked, and had a ton of input on that. But it was fun. I think for me it was it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, and would run into this even goes back to the MFS days. From my Kiewit background, I would often walk the job sites on Saturdays, even when we worked way too hard in the level 3 days as well, but it wasn't expected that you'd be there Saturdays. Most of us were there anyway. But when the construction was going on, I'd just go out to the job site on a Saturdays, and when it was MFS, often run into Jim and Pam. I remember one time running into Mr. Grucock Sr., and I'd know who the guy was, right? And said, "Hey, what are you doing in this building?" And he promptly, politely introduced himself to me, and as you know, he was a board member at MFS in Kiewit and ran it. But and then would see Jim on Saturdays. I'd be there with my kids, walking the site, and yeah, just really fond memories. Yeah.
So let's talk about other memories from that same point in time, because that was right when the boom was in full force. You know, Bernie Evers was kind of the big story. Gary Winnick was coming onto the big stage. Joe Nacho was here in Colorado and on the big stage. The industry was going crazy, and there was a lot of rivalry. I mean, there was a lot of rivalry between what we were doing at Level 3 and certainly WorldCom. You know, the animosity with Bernie Evers and how that all played out. There's also rivalry local here, in particular with Joe Nacho. But then there was rivalry between us and another big faction of what was MFS, that being those who went with Royce Howland and were part of Allegiance. So what do you remember from those years about kind of this way bigger than imaginable dynamic that was in full force in the industry?
Yeah, I think where I would run into it is more on the race for the real estate, right? And you know, finding the right buildings, which at that time were, you know, big concrete facilities, right? I you know, sometimes I say I can't remember what I had for breakfast, but I can remember addresses of carrier hotels like the back of my hand. It's just, you know, the 350 Cermak in Chicago and 60 Hudson and things like that. So I can remember, Dan, the race to acquire the right space, and then the quantity at which space just continued to grow, right? Kind of before the bubble popped, and then, you know, when we would do some of the acquisitions, we were acquiring, you know, a lot of space, and in the case of like Wiltel, we were able to, you know, through the bankruptcy process, you know, kind of pick and choose what we wanted. I think that was a brilliant situation for us. You know, in all of them, we couldn't do that. But I think about it more from the real estate side. I remember, you know, the building access side, which was a big part of what we were doing at the start. And
no one wanted to be responsible for building access. You know,
yeah, I kind of ended up with that.
MFS development you didn't want to be a corporate. And it was like, let's put it out with the sales teams because they can't sell if they don't figure out how to get building access.
And then, but then it became a game of portfolio type deals, right? And it was a couple of the entities that were started and failed with many others in that case, where you were doing, you know, portfolio deals with the largest real estate holders. So that was what I remember is more the big race for real estate, and some people made some big mistakes on assets that, you know, didn't have power or couldn't, you know, different things. Thankfully, I think we for the most part avoided that. We inherited some of it in the you know, kind of in the breakdown of the industry. But yeah, that was more where I got to.
Do you remember the expression Mondo Condo?
Mondo Condo. Yes. That was.
I'm pretty certain Kevin Dundon came up with that.
I think that was a KD. We you know, that was our big move into, you know, what would now be considered co-location, and took down some huge sites, committed billions of dollars in capex and
at that point,
network.
Committing billions of dollars for that was not typical.
Not typical, and in hindsight, you know, many of those turned out to be, you know, high-end. You know, the Peachtree building in Atlanta, you know, is a very high-end connectivity building now, and Cermak and others. So, but yeah, I remember that well. I remember tons of pressure on getting the right sites, and you know, I do think in hindsight that business plan was solid. It was just ahead of its time. You know, a couple of interesting side notes on that. You know, I think about. You know, our friends at Digital Realty Trust. I actually watched a broadcast with Bill Stein, who you know, and Dave Furman, who's the founder of Cyrus. They actually had bourbon on the table, so I was going to suggest you do that for this one. But,
I've had bourbon on the table once here, and it was with recently with Horace Zona. Brought some whiskey with him and said, "Let's have a toast."
I can't imagine what the conversation. We'll do that after.
Yeah.
But we were when I reflect about. You know, some of the transactions we did at that time. There's two quick stories. You know, the first deal that Digital did before they became Digital was GI Partners, and it was our Brom Street data center in London. It was a sale leaseback, but the underlying credit, we bought the building, but we had an underlying credit from Aon So we were able to monetize that building. It was, you may remember Susan Chapman, who was a really talented person on my team and has gone on to do great things career-wise. But Susan and I did that deal with Rick Magnuson and Mike Faust, who went on to start and found an incredibly successful company in digital realty. And then the other Mondo Condo story, post things turning, we had signed we had announced a couple of large deals with a publicly traded real estate company. I'm not going to say the company, but they had announced 2 quarters before this great deal with Level 3 and going to go into this business. The stock took off. Everything was fine. Well, then the world changed, and now we're unwinding some of these projects. And 2 of them were with this company, and we were a fair ways apart on the buyout price. So these were 20-year build-to-suits. We weren't, we were maybe a year into it, and we were far apart on the buyout. Was getting pressure from the leadership to figure this out, and this company had their earnings call, and I'm listening to it, and they open it up for questions, and the first question out of the box was about the Level 3 credit risk. They answered it, call ended. The principal called me and said, "All right, we'll do your deal, but I need the check by Friday." And
Wow.
it's I think about all that in the hindsight, and the craziness that we had ramping up, but then keeping the wheels on the bus too.
Let's talk about the motion, because you talk about ramping up, and then now you were talking about, holy shit,
Yeah.
we're a credit risk. Try to put yourself back there in the motion during the heat of the boom, when things couldn't get done fast enough. These Mondo Condos, the whole idea. So Mondo Condo, as the name implies, condominium. This was before kind of data center was used as a term. It was co-location was a thing, but it was seen as more of an outgrowth of the Bell system.
Right.
And so we would put up techno sites in the early days, and they would fill up really quickly. And it's like, how do you get more cabinets in? Because you made lots of money in cabinets, and once you got a customer in your facility, you had an advantage of selling the bandwidth over and over again. So the notion was, man, we got to go big on this. We got to go big. We got to get much bigger sites, deploy these sites, and deploy them all over. And that's where the term Mondo Condo. We need a big condominium facility to have private rooms and workspaces and lots of spots for cabinets, and we're just going to fill them up one after another. So we're kind of in the throes of that. Probably just a year and a half that probably got conceived before kind of we went off the cliff. We as an industry.
Yeah.
So, but we had gotten it started. It was rolling. Put yourself in that emotional state, and then contrast that to the holy shit, something just changed, and all of a sudden we're in a whole different mode of trying to get out of and unwind what we had just recently begun.
Yeah, it seemed like snap of a fingers, right? It wasn't quite that quick, but it was pretty quick. That taking it up was a lot more fun than getting out of it. I'll say that for sure. But we did the same thing with our headquarters, right? We were expanding the headquarters because we had filled it up and taken. So all of that kind of came to a head fairly quickly. And I think we all did a lot of strategic things to keep Level 3 out of bankruptcy and make it a continuing entity. But on the real estate side, we also were downsizing some of our gateways, right? That we had because as the business plan went on, same thing was happening. Well, instead of 40,000 square feet, let's take 80. So it was a cumulative problem of more real estate than we needed. And
more
I think
everything than
more.
we
Well,
needed.
that's true. More employees and work. Yeah, this is very true.
We were over pulling our fiber network. We had this big plans to put fiber in another conduit because we were selling fiber, and all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, people we're selling fiber to are wanting to get out of their fiber deals.
Yeah.
What do we do now? And so it was all over. It was with generators. It was with construction projects. I mean, it was across the board. We went from can't get stuff done quick enough, and we can't think big enough, got to think bigger, to holy shit.
Yeah. I think, when we changed direction, we had half a dozen, you were involved with some of these too, all of them. We had, half a dozen other Mondo Condo, large, essentially now we would just call them large colo facilities that were in the process of being teed up, and we came to a hard stop, and then immediately put the car in reverse and started working our way out, like the private one. And I think we did a real good job. We had some stuff like the project in New York, 85 10th Avenue, huge investment and huge construction effort, and then the telco bubble popped, and we had a lot of excess space, and had some things with Lehman Brothers that you were involved with, post 9/11, sadly, that created a business opportunity for us in that asset. So it was much like when we were ramping up. It was kind of all hands on deck, and then all hands on deck to figure out a way to unwind it. I can remember going with Ron Vidal and Kevin to meet with a couple of the big banking entities post 9/11 to. And we were successful to some extent finding, alternative purposes for those buildings, for that building. Yeah.
During the height of the boom, you like me had a lot of stock options, and they were worth a whole bunch of money when the stock was up at $100, $120, $130 a share, and then a short period of time later, instead of being worth $120 a share, it was barely worth anything.
Yeah.
How did that hit you, and what do you remember from, oh my gosh, I was worth all this money on paper, to, holy cow, I'm not worth anywhere close to what I thought I was worth, and how do you explain it to your family? And
we all had to, I can remember, I was married at the time to a wonderful person. I'm in Hong Kong, and I think the stock was at 115 or 120. It was starting to come back, and she said, geez, we had a comfortable house in Lafayette, and she said, we should, do something with the basement and maybe landscape the yard. And I thought, this is insane. I was still, drinking the Kool-Aid, but thank God, she pushed that. So I begrudgingly cast out what little I could, right? Because most of ours hadn't, at least for me, most of it hadn't invested yet. But so I've got in that house a very nice landscape backyard and a finished basement that cost me about $2.50 in value now. So that's kind of a positive story. I think, I grew up in a great family, but didn't have anything growing up. So it wasn't like I was, my lifestyle hadn't quite changed yet. My mindset had. And I thought I would be, retiring at 40 and coaching high school football. And then thankfully, I'm glad, I'm thrilled with what I'm doing now and continuing to have an amazing run in the industry. But those are kind of my memories of that. I can remember, lots of really nice cars in the parking lot that weren't there when we started.
I was guilty as charged on that one. I was really stupid and bought a yellow Ferrari. And
I remember that car.
Yeah, and I'm like,
it was a beautiful car.
Beautiful car, but I cringe at the memory of having bought it and driving it around. I mean, that, I certainly got caught up in the craziness like, a lot of people did.
Yeah.
And that was probably the most visible, thing I did that I, wish I wouldn't have done.
I have, if I think about, remember the Quantum building, which when we were building the campus, we were just taking, that was lab space that we dropped cubes into, and lots of, that was, to me, that was the heart of the build out, right? If you left at 7:30 at night, you felt like you weren't doing your part of the team.
Oh, yes.
One of the quick car reminds me of this story. I remember walking out at night, and our CFO and good friend of both of ours, Doug Bradbury, was out, and I said, "Do you need a ride?" He said, "No, my son's picking me up." And I'm always impressed with people that so his son comes up in a car like I would have drove in high school, right?
Yeah.
And so I just remember that. All right, that's great messaging, and think about that. But by the time we moved to the new campus, the parking lot looked a lot different.
Yes.
So
sure did.
You weren't the only one.
Yeah, I wasn't the only one, but you think of what you did that you wish you wouldn't have done, not what other people did. Quite often.
True.
So take us through, you touched on a little bit, those years where it was all about, we got to save level 3. I mean, the 2000, I would say 2002 to 2004, those 2 years were all about how do we not go bankrupt ourselves.
Yeah.
And it was everything we could do, every trick that, people could pull, including, a couple of the deals that Jim was able to do with Cyril and Don's help to find those software companies and use that to avoid triggering the debt covenants.
Yeah.
What were you doing in that period? You were talking about getting out of a lot of the real estate commitments and monetizing what could be monetized, but take us through that period of time.
Yeah, I could remember, some of it was corporate real estate related, stuff around the campus, the headquarters. Some of it was technology related. I remember a big piece of it because I made a couple of mistakes, but leaning on a lot of my team that I get to work with today at CBRE, like we need to make sure these guys are going to close, right? We can't get gamed. We can't get these, with the, if you remember the expanded headquarters site across the street from the main headquarters, we had to work closely with the brokerage team to make sure we were dealing with reputable folks that were going to close the deal because we had we needed certainty. So that was a big part of it. Can remember downsizing offices. I can remember you've had an amazing podcast with Neil and Brady, and love salespeople. They're necessary in all businesses, but we're downsizing offices, and for a lot of the sales folks, I was at best appear and sometimes not there. And I can remember some calls with Neil that if they got a problem with them, just to have them call me. I mean, it was at that time, again, you think about what it was like going up, but for me, it wasn't fun going down, but man, career-wise, you really learned who was going to be in your foxhole with you, right? Yeah. And you were a great, and I still use this today. Like, who's going to be in the foxhole, right, when things are going bad? And you really got to learn who your friends were and who the people were you could trust. And so I use that as an example. There could be hundreds of them. And the other reflection I have, Dan, is because we were in such an enviable position, and this is reflective in, if you just look at the Level 3 alumni throughout the industry, we hired some amazing people and got to work with a talent pool that I would argue was second to none. And when we did those first couple of cuts, those were, you could get through those and you could rationalize the roles and the people, and man, you were left with just the best of the best. And again, it wasn't fun in the context of what you were doing, but the talent that existed and the fact, and I've heard you talk about this, I think you reflect on it in the book too, the commitment around the cause was unbelievable. And I value that. I think to this day, I'm a better professional having kind of lived through that and seeing how different people handle that situation. And I still today use my foxhole analogy that I picked up from our Level 3 experience.
Yeah, and the sense of purpose and mission, Jim brought that, Royce amplified it. I know I carried that forward in Zale. There was like the clarity of what we were going to be, what we were going to do, and that, no matter what, we were going to make it happen. Even in much smaller venture today, Cruise Venture, we have a very strong and decisive sense of purpose. What are we trying to accomplish? And when you have that and it's authentic and it's something people believe in, boy, does that serve as kind of a way of getting the right people together, doing the right things, and getting through the tough times together, and creating something special. At the end of the day,
you did it as Zale,
yeah.
Right? I mean, and it is when you've lived that environment. It's intense, but man, it's so valuable. And I think, as we'll talk about my current journey, but I came in with CB. We had low expectations. The business was very different, but we brought together kind of a core group of people, and I feel very fortunate that rarely do people get that opportunity once, and I've had it a couple of times, and it is it's amazing. I mean, we're both sports guys, right? Mm-hmm. It's not always does the team with the best athletes win. I do think in Level 3 we clearly had the best athletes.
Maybe we had too many.
Maybe we had too many of the best athletes. Too many quarterbacks or something, and not enough left tackles. But same thing with the sports team, right? If you have that camaraderie and you have a common purpose and everybody's in it for the better cause, the net result, it's fun, and it's fun to be a part of something like that.
Yeah. So let's go through the next period of Level 3, and we'll work our way, and I wanted to have plenty of time to talk about what you've been doing the last several years and looking forward. But the next phase of Level 3, now I'm out of there at that time. I went off and did the ICG, But the next phase of level 3 was really about consolidating. It was about doing deals to buy companies, many of which had, lots of skeletons in their closet, but one after another, level 3 acquired. And a lot of what level 3 would acquire was real estate and real estate agreements, real estate contracts, maybe real estate that was overlapping what we have, sometimes complementary to what we had at level 3. So what were those years like for you? What's your memories of we're back on the offense again.
Yeah.
We're going to consolidate the industry. We were pretty much the only ones who survived without a bankruptcy, and we had cash in the bank. I'm saying we, I wasn't even there at the time, but I will always think of level 3 as a we. Level 3's, back on the offense.
Yeah, it was. I enjoyed that, but it also led to my exit from a standpoint of it got a little tiring. But I think about spending time in Pennsylvania, right, when we did the Telcove, and that had a fascinating history behind it with the Regis family and some of the assets that we acquired in that with the headquarters in a small town. And then spending a ton of time in Austin with the Broadwing, and I remember, some of our, David House and others saying, "Man, this is a great talent pool. Don't mess this up relative to the real estate." And at the same time, the pressure was, "Hey, that's expensive real estate." So that, it was at the time stressful, but fun to look back on. And Austin has emerged as a tech hub, from 30 years later, 25 years later. So I enjoyed kind of that, and the story that is funny now but wasn't at the time is when we were making multiple attempts to buy the Wiltel business. And I think were you gone by then, or were you still there when Wiltel happened?
I think I was gone when Wiltel happened. Yeah, I think that happened well after I left.
They had built this beautiful headquarters in Tulsa, and they had spent a large amount of money on it. And the value of the company was declining, and Sunit and Jim and others really wanted to buy the deal, and they would summon me out to Tulsa, and I would go out. And at that time, Tulsa was falling apart relative to it's a wonderful city. And today it's recovered, and that building I think now is part of the city government building. But I forget what they had it on the books for. It was a significant amount of money, and they would ask me to get a value, and I would work with my colleagues at CB, and the number was half of what they had it on the books for. And we'd come back a second round, and the number got lower. And I can remember Sunit not being our friend Sunit Patel, who I was working for as our CFO, just not being happy with the number. But it is what it is at that time. So that was one of the stories that I remember, where and it may be indicative of the industry, where the real estate value of a company you're buying, even though the real estate value is decreasing quickly, was an increasing part of the value of the overall purchase. And I think that tells you what was happening then. So that was a piece I remember. And then my exit was, I had just gotten, I like to build things, right? I got spoiled with MFS and level 3, and I decided it was time to go do something different. Probably 2006. I went and talked to Sunit. My timing was terrible because I think he had stepped out of the board meeting, and I surprised him a little bit. And I agreed to stick around, but I was done. And then tying back to my friend, Mr. Caruso, first phase, I was going to go work, and I think about this, Dan, when I think about my career, I was going to go work in traditional development for a large developer in Colorado. I didn't know well, but they offered me a role. I said, yeah, I'm a real estate guy. And went and had a happy hour drink with our friend Tom Ray, who at that time was running CRG West with Carlisle. And we were negotiating an exit, back to the theme here, of a large piece of real estate in Brooklyn, and said, Tom, we got to get this deal done because I'm leaving. And that ended with him saying, had you accepted this role, I would love for you to come work with us at Carlisle at CRG West, which I did. But part of that story, tying back to you, and I don't know if you'll remember this, but so this is 2006. Is that ICG, or is that first phase of Zayo? What would that have been?
That would have been, we exited ICG in mid-2006, and then kind of, I would say, started Zayo.
Because you were in Louisville.
Early 2007, yes.
You were in Old Town Louisville. I reached out to you in an email and said, hey, I gave you a couple questions about private equity because I'd never been in the private equity space. And instead
If
of
it was Old Town Louisville, it was actually a little bit later than that, because that would have
Was it?
certainly been Zayo, and that would have been 2000, late, probably maybe early 2008, late 2007.
all right, time flies.
Yeah.
But you reached out and said, let's come have a beer. And I sat down with you for hour plus, and you walked me through at a level that I could understand what I should be asking for from a PE world, and you did a great job. And the Carlisle thing was short-lived because then the financial crisis happened. But I've always appreciated that. That was a thing that you didn't have to do, and helped me out a ton. And so that was my exit from level 3, and thankfully a redirect that kept me in the digital infrastructure space.
Yeah. Are they still calling it digital infrastructure, or is AI infrastructure kind of the word of the day?
We are now, thankfully, after 5 years of trying at CB, calling ourselves digital infrastructure.
Okay.
So I'm excited. I've been,
So you adopted the name just as people are saying, no, we should call it AI
for us, it's
infrastructure.
still, the way I think about it, and I've shared this a couple of times, a data center without connectivity is a really expensive refrigerator, right? So
Yeah.
the connectivity piece is important. I know you've mentioned on a few things. I think with AI, it's just going to get more amplified, and so yeah, I'm using the term digital infrastructure and AI infrastructure. I mean, getting into the business. I mean, we still see, Dan, huge demand from our enterprise clients for cloud, private cloud, core compute. So while AI gets a lot of attention, and it should, we still see meaningful growth in kind of traditional compute. But
And how is AI affecting that demand set for traditional, large enterprise who are certainly being impacted by AI in a big way, and they have to be wanting to protect their data, so they can't just rely on public clouds. They have to be thinking about, where does my data live that I'm using, in GPUs? How do I make sure my data is my data? Because I don't want that being part of broader data sense. So it's a combination of both, privacy, but also, protecting your competitive advantage of your data. So how is the AI boom affecting the way enterprises are trying to figure out their kind of data center and GPU strategy?
Right. I think it's TBD. I'm in my role, so let's
start with what your role is, and how that role came to be, how it evolved into what it is today.
Yeah, so I'm global lead for our advisory business for digital infrastructure data centers at CBRE, based in the Denver office.
And CBRE is
Fortune 120 largest commercial real estate entity, and we do a whole lot of other things in development and that, publicly traded.
So about as big of a portfolio of real estate as...
Yeah, we're significantly larger
services
than our next combined group of competitors, which are all good companies. But yeah, we are dominant from a standpoint of size and global presence. And thankfully, the data center business is now in the conversation, which it wasn't when I started 15 years ago. So my role 4 or 5 years ago was expanded to global. And if you think about the clients in the digital infrastructure space, they're Fortune 20 companies, they're big banks, and the investors, which wasn't the case 15 years ago. Today, it's the biggest private equity companies in the world. I believe this is still the case. If you look at the 10 largest publicly traded REITs, 5 of them are digital infrastructure, and from a standpoint of market cap in the U.S., right? It's big entities, and so CB typically had aligned their businesses by region and then separately by country, and made the decision 4 or 5 years ago that because our client base is global, we needed to adopt global, and I was fortunate enough to be a part of that, and it's been fantastic. The other piece that ties back to a Dan Caruso call, we bought a network advisory business about 6 years ago out of Boston that was a partner for Zayo, and I got a call from my friend Dan Caruso that said, "Hey, I just read about this," and
What was the network advisory business?
That was NEF was the name of the company,
yes.
Fiber Locator.
Yes.
Yeah, and they were a partner of yours, and that's been a great business for us. Mike Murphy runs that business, and he's a phenomenal guy, well known in the industry. And the plan was to expand that and still could do multiple acquisitions in the space. The problem was the private equity guys saw the same thing and were a little more willing to pay higher multiples. But we've still built a great business under Mike, and it's doing some amazing things.
I was always tempted to do something with NEF because I'm like, man, talk about knowledge of every fiber network.
Yeah.
NEF has it, and if if we owned that business, we could gain the benefit of that knowledge for our broader business. But I never had quite the guts.
I'm glad we beat you to it. Yeah, it's been a great addition. So how does that tie back to your AI question?
I don't know if you beat me to it because I was talking to him for a lot of years. I could never quite get to the point where I even put an offer on the table.
Yeah.
I kept thinking about it, but never, could quite get comfortable with how to explain why I thought this was the right thing to do, given it wasn't our core business, but it was such an important service that every fiber network needed. I'm like, maybe we should just own that and get the benefit of it.
That's it. Yeah, it hadn't. I mean, when I think about it now in the context of the world I live in, it'd almost be like a large real estate holder, be a Brookfield buying a brokerage company, right? You might defeat the value because the value is doing the brokerage part. So, yeah, I did not know that. That is
and that's what I kept grappling with. Could you keep it separate enough that it still would be viable as a business, or would be, well, it's owned by Zayo and.
I'm glad we ended up with it.
Yeah, good. So it's worked out really well.
So the AI piece, because I kind of took a veer there, but right now the AI investment is massive in training models, right? And you're seeing these gigawatt facilities, and we're heavily involved in a number of them. And the demand continues to exceed supply. We've got utility problems all over the globe with supply. The next phase of AI, the inference phase, that people way smarter than me, that like a Larry Ellison, yourself, Zuckerberg are talking about. They're talking about it in scales significantly larger than training, and then it will actually be the deployment of usable. Think about commercial drones and driver autonomous vehicles at scale, and so many other things that we can't even imagine. I'm excited to see how that plays out, Dan, and we've got a lot of banking clients in particular. Our own company, looking at what does private AI mean? Because you're right, there's a lot of stuff that we, for regulatory reasons, confidentiality reasons, are not going to go into a large scale Chat GPT model. And from the perspective of the business that I lead, I see it as highly opportunistic, right? So you think about Denver, Boulder, New York, Los Angeles, London. You're going to have facilities of some scale. I don't know, but I'll say 10 to 50 megawatts, right?
Scale.
Yeah. In today's world, 10 megawatts is small, but when you and I first worked together, that was a massive facility. So I think those will evolve, and you'll see.
And let's talk more about those types of facilities. The geographic, I know a lot of this is doesn't have answers to the questions yet, but it's in a lot of dialogue that you're part of. What's the current thinking about? Where will those locations be most important? Because proximity matters to where either the customer is, or proximity to where the traffic is. When you talk about drones and autonomous vehicles, how are people currently thinking about? Do you need, what does that inference stage look like in terms of not just size and scope, but location?
Not the answer you're looking for, but almost every conversation I have, depending on the client and the business, is vastly different. Mm-hmm. We've got a mid-market, very successful AI company we're working with, and they're saying, Pat, as long as we're in the market, what we're doing for our clients, and mid-market, their focus is mid-market companies and below, right? So they're not looking to the big hyperscalers, but they've got a very successful business, and they're, I will say, very relaxed about they have to be in the major markets, but it's not I have to be X milliseconds from the carrier hotel. That's one business. The others, I think about our financial service clients and how they're thinking about it. And a couple of the hyperscalers where we're working with early stage inference, they have very specific regions. They all vary, but I think the big piece that I would suggest, Dan, at this point is they're still trying to figure it out.
Yep. And when it's very specific, what are factors that cause the specificity of, because I'm sure there's a different factor if you're a certain type of hyperscaler than if you're a bank, than if you're something else. But generally speaking, what kind of factors are citing? Is it based on how their network is configured? Is it based on where the trading floors are? Is it based on kind of a coverage map?
So some of that piece we're not directly engaged with. We're more like the deployment side of a network. If you think about our time together, the deployment side of the network.
So they
we
tell
get
you the conclusion. They don't tell you why they got there.
Yeah. So if you think about, retail. Retail is super exciting. I was talking to a client about this the other day, right? And it can be as simple as, AI automation of inventory, or it can be, you may already have this in your house, but instead of going to Nordstrom's and trying on 5 different suits, whatever your journey of choice is.
I don't buy suits anymore.
I don't either.
I buy all my shirts. I buy from one place. Weekends in Boulder, because it's easy. It's a little bit higher end, but it's not ridiculous. Like if you go to like some ridiculous, retail place. But I just go there 4 times a year, maybe 5, when I just have a spur of the moment. Go there, buy shirts like this. This is a relatively new one, so I usually buy 7 or 8 shirts at a time. Little jackets put over the shirts, and that's my clothes shopping. And all my pants.
It's good to be in Boulder. It's good to be in tech, isn't it? Yeah,
it makes it easy, and
Clearly,
it's kind of stylish, but but doesn't take much time, and it's efficient.
I don't even wear a suit in London or New York anymore. It's so. But the experience on retail is, I'm gonna get on a webcam, and it's gonna fit me for my leisure, whatever I've got, and then I'll go pick it up at the store. It'll show up, and that's a simple example. But then think about industrial, right? In robotics and real-time inventory, and that's that's happening, right? So those are the things that we see our clients solving for, and then within your homes, I'm sure you already have it here with your beautiful place, but everything's going to be automated. So it's what I like to say is the stuff that we're going to use inference AI for, large percentage of it hasn't even been invented yet, which is super exciting.
For certain. And so one storyline I've been putting in a lot of my talks and kind of pieces lately, the big expression out of Silicon Valley in 2011 was software eats the world. The idea that it came from Mark Andreessen originally, and then Clyde Perkins, Mary Meeker kind of really publicized it a lot. His idea was that software was the only thing that mattered. So everything is going to move to software. Software is where all value creation was going to take place. That's the only thing you should fund is software. The trend now is very different than that. The trend now has a couple different taglines. One is called physics AI, which is coming out of MIT. So the notion that AI is pure software is interesting, but not that interesting. AI in conjunction with the real world is, going to be game changing. You mentioned drones, autonomous vehicles, but everything that the physical world kind of needs to do or be combined with AI takes it to the next level up. American Dynamism is another expression that comes out of also Mark Andreessen's organization, Andreessen Horowitz. Mm-hmm. And American Dynamism, which I think could apply to Europe, it could apply to the Middle East. It's about what is the critical infrastructure needs of your country. What's most critical if you're going to be competitive in the future, if you're going to be safe in the future. So those are the things you should be investing in. And the third, all kind of pointing the same direction, is defense tech. Defense tech used to be a bad word. Now defense tech is extraordinarily meaningful in the venture capital and private equity world. But again, it's the same things. It's things like drones, it's quantum, it's AI, it's power. It's all the same themes. And digital and AI infrastructure is in the middle of it all. And Colorado, which is big in space tech, big in quantum, big in digital infrastructure, Colorado is extraordinarily well positioned to be a leader in this new era of investing. So it's pretty exciting how the world is changing, and inference-based AI is going to be a huge part of how all of these interactions between the physical world and AI take place, because that takes place, quote unquote, at the edge. It takes place in the real world, not in some remote data center somewhere.
I can't. 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about 5G, right? And never really evolved. I've heard some people, this is the killer app, inference AI, whatever it ends up being. And I do see that from a standpoint of of our business and the infrastructure around it. And I've heard you talk a couple times about the legacy networks that Level 3 or Zayo or others built, and is this the opportunity to optimize that return? And I think a lot of us think that this might be that chance.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I'm still a big shareholder of Zayo, and we need that value of Zayo to start rising again for certain.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see, how it plays out. And I have got a really cool role and to get to meet globally with different industries and clients. We were on a call today talking about life science and what happens with the life sciences world and the gene stuff behind it. Massive amounts of data, right? Massive amounts of data, and what do you do with it? How do you store it? That'll be it's going to be really cool. I mean, we touch on the power thing, right? We have a power issue globally that is, in some ways, I think about. I ask this often. What's the difference between the current build out, the AI build out, and the telco world that you and I lived in? And I think one of them, in my view, is we could go out and raise a couple $1 billion and put a shovel in the ground and we're in business. A throttle on the data center space, and I'm not suggesting there may not be an overbuild here. We can talk about that if you'd like to, but the throttle, somewhat in a good way, on the data center builds are if you don't have power, you can raise the money, and so I think it may have imposed a little bit of discipline, whether that's warranted or not, time will tell. But that lack of power has maybe slowed down some of the investments that wanted to maybe come into the space. I don't know if you think about that. And the other difference, AI, maybe some of the recent AI emergence changes this a little bit, but up until a few years ago, when you looked at 80% of the capacity getting absorbed was Fortune 20 companies, right, with great balance sheets. Now that the AI dynamic has changed that a little bit, and so we need to step back and reflect on, because that's inserted some of the risks that we had back in our days together, where when you filled up your gateway and then you looked at the companies and they were all startups, and when that world imploded, telco world went with it. Does that make sense to you? Have you thought about that at all, or?
Oh yeah, I mean so there's you mentioned a little bit of discipline. There is so much data center build out taking place. You know this a lot better than I do. You're smack in the middle of it, but the quantity of data center build out and money raised for data center build out is hard to even get your head around right now, and the need to have utility to serve those data centers is a constraining factor.
Yeah.
So how those data centers that come to market and have plenty of power and are geographically well situated will do extraordinarily well in terms of creating value for their stakeholders. But my guess is there's a lot of data center projects who are going to discover some period of time after they're somewhat pot committed that the power resource, utility resource, or other components of the value chain to make the facility activated in a full sense of the word, may not come as easy as they thought it was. And then what happens? So I think there is kind of there's going to be some big winners, and my guess is some big losers. Now, if you have a portfolio and your big winners outweigh your small number of losers, you'll be fine. But I would imagine in some cases it's not going to quite work out that way either. And that's where we talked early about quantum. So the quantum computing, first of all, quantum technology is really 3, and depending on how you count it, maybe 4 big categories. Usually people talk about quantum computing, and that's what we'll mostly talk about here. But it's important to note that there's also quantum sensing, which in our vernacular sounds a lot like the Internet of Things, like different types of devices scattered all over the place, on the earth, in the earth, in the sky, on vehicles, so that use quantum technology to do things that you can't do in the absence of using quantum.
Right.
Well, those need to be connected back to the rest of the networks and eventually a quantum computer. So that becomes almost like this quantum Internet of Things that's going to happen. And one of the first major applications of that is timekeeping. So distributed time, which is relevant for trading networks and finance, it's for telecom networks. How much bandwidth can you get on a fiber line can be enhanced dramatically if your ability to keep the time function is much more secure. quantum positioning systems replacing global positioning systems. So you have this Internet of Things dynamic that's going to create demand in the form of inference, but you also have what's called quantum networking, quantum communications, because quantum devices are going to want to talk to each other in the quantum realm, not in the classical realm that we live in today. So over an extended period of time, the network is going to not be replaced by, but it's going to be a parallel network that's based on quantum that over time will become more and more a part of all networks.
So that's a different network than what you built at Level 3 in Zayo.
Well, it still relies on fiber.
Okay.
So that's the good
There's
news.
some value there.
Yeah, but
Okay.
the equipment will be different and the mechanisms will be different. So it'll be a nice boom for a lot of people who are selling equipment. Be good if you got fiber because it's another demand for your fiber. But that's going to happen slowly over time. It's starting to happen now, but it's not going to affect the demand curve for some period of time. But what's interesting about quantum computing, coming back to computing, is the question was always, when are quantum computers going to be ready to do things that you can't do with normal computers? And what will the killer app be? Okay, so the killer app, people talk about, discovering new materials, discovering new drugs, breaking all encryption codes. So a lot of things that you can never do with a classical computer, you will be able to do with quantum. But here's where it gets interesting. The thing that's being talked about a lot right now that wasn't talked about a year ago, at least I never heard it talked about a year ago, is what if the killer app for quantum computers is that it could do what classical computers can do, but with a tiny fraction of the resource, tiny fraction of power and energy.
I've heard you talk about this.
Yeah.
The power piece jumps out at me given what we're investing. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's starting to become kind of a real discussion topic, not just within the quantum technology world, but starting to get into the government world too. Like, is that and when will that be a thing? I mean, if you can literally do computation, traditional computation that's needed for Gen AI, the large language models, and you did it on a quantum computer, and some of these quantum computers, it's a room this size can do with what one of those massive data centers can do, based on equipment in here that doesn't really need to be cooled that much. It operates mostly at room temperature. It's like, whoa, that sounds like a killer app to me. Now, is that going to be viable? Is it going to be viable? It's not going to be viable 3 years from now, but it's going to start to become viable 5 years from now. Is it going to be prevalent 10 years from now? That's a very real possibility, and that would make every quantum viable quantum company worth its weight in gold.
Wow. I'm sure you do this. You and I are about the same age, I think. The reflect back sometimes. I talked about this earlier and how we got here and different steps along the way that could have, we're in our 60s talking about an industry that's already been wildly dynamic, and it's still going to be that way long after we hang it up. And I just think how fortunate, not only the people that we've got to interact with, incredibly smart people and multi-billion-dollar projects and investments, but that's fun.
It is crazy.
Pinch myself. Yeah.
The thought of like living, in our life span and not being involved in this just, mind-boggling revolution, like being on the periphery of it. I'm like, oh my gosh, that would have been a life of always being on the outside looking in, as opposed to being. And you and I had the fortune of being smack in the middle of a lot of it. We weren't like just in the story. We were like in the big chapters of the story, and in the leading companies that were doing the craziest stuff in this whole multi-decade cycle.
Another, hopefully you'll find this funny. I think in hindsight, it wasn't at the time, but when I had the fortune to work with you for quite a while, we were building the network, right? And it was, the lineup was KD, myself, I think Jack and Peter Zook, or different. You were the tip of the spear on the network.
Peter Zook, that's the name. Was that his last name, Zook?
Yeah, he was.
That's the name
came
I
over
heard
from
about.
Kiewit.
Yeah.
I remember in those sessions, they were absolutely, like everything at Level 3, super intense, and everything dealing with Dan always was intense, but in a good way. But I figured out.
Not always in a good way.
Well, maybe not. I'm sitting here now, it is. But
I've got a couple of my team members in the room here. They've seen the old Dan every once in a while.
I think
but
a few
not
of us
like
have
old
seen
days.
that. But what I figured out quickly was you didn't want to deal with the real estate stuff. And my role was to be 5 minutes or less on my update and have no bad news. I still tell people that story. What was it like to work with Dan? I said, he was awesome to me, but I just made sure I didn't have any bad news. And I think you just wanted me to take care of that. And then the rest of it was far more complicated than what I had to do. But those are great memories.
I was the same. I mean, what I was fortunate enough to have and fortunate enough to focus on was if you had really talented people all around you, not just your one or two, but like if your weakest person was still strong relative to what they were doing, you could get a lot done. I mean, a whole lot done.
Yeah.
But if you always had, multiple weaknesses kind of in whatever scope you had, I mean, you were getting sucked into those areas and the whole group would suffer. So, part of, and it wasn't easy to do that. I mean, that sounds obvious, but that means you have to make really difficult decisions at times where you have a good person that's a likable person, in an area, but they might be a good person, they might be likable, but they're just not, able to perform as well as you need in that spot. And there's other people that can perform better. You have a hard choice to make. Do you, now if they're a total failure and a jerk off, it's that's easy. But if they're a good person and they're somewhere in the middle, and it kind of gnaws away at you, what do you do? Or if it's someone that you feel really loyal to, and it's they're not the strength they need to be, but boy, you've worked with them for a long time, you have a relationship with them, and so you overlook that. I mean, that's what causes a full group to come down. And I still, even some of the companies we're invested in now, it's trying to nudge kind of leaders to see that and do something about it is more work than I would expect it to be. You'd think like a little bit of like coaching and a little bit of explaining would give them kind of the fortitude to take those, but many of them don't. And then, a year or two passes and you look back and say, wow, all this opportunity we had, well, how come we didn't take advantage of it? And a lot of it is because you didn't have a strong enough team.
A lot of truth to that. I think too that we were all so young.
Yeah.
And
young and stupid.
Honestly, I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Right? That was how hard people worked, and that was how direct you behaved. And I think back now, and again, I've heard you talk about this a little bit. It was survival of the fittest. Not necessarily. That sounds bad. I don't mean it sound as bad as it maybe come across, but it was super intense, and you had to cover your bases to survive. Otherwise, you got pushed out.
Yeah, it felt like a daily challenge that went on for years, literally. I mean, because we went right from MFS for me into the heat of WorldCom, extracting myself out of WorldCom into the immediate. Okay, we've got a startup with no business plan and $3 billion. Go figure out what to do. I mean, to the big boom, which you couldn't get enough stuff done at any time, to the survival bust. And then I went to ICG turnaround, then for years and years, it was like every day felt like, if you don't get shit done today, you're falling behind. And, I think it took a toll on a lot of it. It took a toll on me physically and, in my personal life. And I think it has for a lot of folks.
Yeah, for sure. Redirect. Enron. Do you remember the Enron power discussion? Should we?
Yeah. Talk about it a little bit.
I'll give you my version, but it's so everyone knows the Enron story. But part of theirs was the utility piece, and we had just opened. We were just opening our facilities, and if you remember Mark Fania, but Mark was a key member of my team. Came over from Excel. He understood the energy piece, and so either you or Kevin said, "Hey, go meet with these guys. It's a really important client." And sure, and we sat down with them, and literally, the history's been written, but like they're the smartest guys in the room, and they had their suits cost more than my entire wardrobe, and they were pitching us this whole deal. Well, you commit to this number, which was 10x what we were paying. Our gateways were just starting up, and anyway, I won't repeat the whole story. Came out, said this makes no sense.
No, go into a little bit more.
They were basically doing a long-term commitment on power at a rate, and then when you ramp up, this is all going to make sense. Well, what if we don't? And and I'm dumbing it down so that I can retell it. But thankfully, I had Mark who understood the space. And I remember coming out, I think I called you, said, this doesn't make any sense for a variety of reasons. And I'm assuming you had a conversation with Kevin, or they had a conversation with Kevin and said, this guy's clearly not smart enough to understand what we're trying to do. So flash forward a week later, and I can remember you and I and Mark I don't know if there's anybody else, but in a room with the same guys, given the same pitch, and you asking some very candid Dan Caruso questions and scratching your head a little bit. And, it didn't make sense, but it was the emperor has no clothes type thing.
Yeah.
And, again, you think about different things, decisions you did or didn't make. And, that one was a fascinating, and of course that was before the whole story got written about that whole business plan. But
I have a memory, and maybe it's a hallucination because years pass and but I literally have a memory of being in that room, and my memory it was on the fourth floor. It was Jim's conference room, which you didn't always use that gym conference room, but for Enron we were using the gym conference room. At least that's the room I remember being in, and I remember the looking at each other, the Enron looking at each other and saying, yeah, he doesn't get it. And at that point, my memories are referring to me because I was asking some questions and trying to understand what they were saying. And I literally didn't understand what they were trying to get at there. And I thought I was a smart enough guy, but their retort was to almost belittle you.
Oh, for sure.
By saying, these people just aren't smart enough to understand what we're saying. Yeah. They're like, okay, I guess that's a possibility. I don't know. They're talking about hedging and futures, and you do this and we do that, and we'll take care of you got to do all this power from us, and you're gonna get the benefit out of that, and we'll buy fiber from you in a swap transaction, and we're all gonna be able to inflate the prices of everything, and show these huge profits. And it was like, okay.
That sorry to digress, but that was one I thought about on the way over there. Was
Scott Yeager part of that? Because I think because he was part of MFS, and I thought they had him tagged to kind of lead familiar, it, and he was close to Kathy Perrone. I think Kathy Perrone was at the room trying to be kind of sales kind of executive, bringing the two sides together to do a big deal. And so she was really mad at me for not,
That's right. Yeah.
That's at least my hallucination of kind of how that played out.
That was, again, just fascinating history there that the more you talk about it, the more they come back. Yeah.
Yeah, because people don't think of Enron and Dynegy as, the bandwidth aspect of what they were doing, the fiber aspect. I mean, they were, buying and building and participating in builds of fiber networks. They were doing all kinds of bandwidth swap transactions. And that wasn't the only thing that brought them down, but it wasn't just a minor footnote to what they were doing. It played a meaningful role in the collapse of those two firms, and ultimately what happened to Arthur Andersen that you mentioned earlier.
Unbelievable. And then you think about the output of that with, we talked earlier about Digital Realty and what they've created. I had some discussions with, I think there's more Level 3 alumni in the space than Digital, but they might disagree. But
I think they'd be wrong on that one.
Well,
if you combine the Level 3, and then there's a lot of Zayo who weren't at Level 3. A lot of Zayo who were at Level 3. There's also a lot of Zayo that weren't at Level 3 who are running a lot of the companies nowadays too. Certainly on the fiber side, you see that all over the place. And I assume on the data center side too, but more on the fiber side. But you combine people who have Zayo, Level 3, and MFS in their background, and look at what they've done across the broad industry on a global basis, it's gigantic.
And then tying back to Enron, when you look at Switch and what Rob has done with that company, buying the right asset, right asset at that time at the right time, and that's an amazing success story for buying depressed assets and turning them into something. So
there's so many great stories. That part of writing the book Bandwidth, it took a lot of work because I had to do a ton of research, and it wasn't something you could get other people to do the research. I had people helping me kind of organize and assemble stuff, but if you weren't in the industry, you weren't even sure where to look for stuff, because it's almost like the industry was so well covered during the boom, and then the whole press, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, they looked like idiots when the collapse hit. So they almost stopped covering it in any meaningful way other than the most tragic things they would cover. And then they just ignored our industry for a decade. So if you didn't know how to hunt down kind of the information you were looking to, it wouldn't just pop up at you. And I wanted to make sure I had the facts right, at least from the perspective of how it was written at the time. Knowing that just because Wall Street Journal writes an article a certain way, they might have a third of the story 100% right, and another third 50% right, and another third they don't even know about what was happening behind the scenes. But I wanted to be accurate, but I wanted to be kind of a celebration of everything, the blood, sweat, and tears we all put into the industry. And I've got so much feedback from individuals, many of which are like, you would never know me because, I worked at this company and I was in charge of their construction program. Then I went here and I did their, real estate deals. So I was never high up, but I was in this company and that company, this company. And oh my God, the memories you brought back and the, the history you portrayed. And boy, that felt so good when people come up to me and share their stories.
Well, and the thing that for those of us that didn't grow up in the industry, I know you started with the Bell. I told you that earlier, came in through the banking space and real estate. Capturing the history kind of pre-deregulation was a key component of it, right? Because it was a sleepy business that certainly wasn't sexy at all, and you went there if you wanted. I think about that sometimes too, and so anyway, that part was valuable to me. And then I think about transitioning to what's happened in that space. You and I signed up for a high risk, high reward journey, and we knew that coming into it. And I think about some of the the U.S. West of the world, and some of those folks that
Frontier.
They didn't sign up for that, right?
No.
They signed up for a career job, and
a lot of them were tailing their career, and their life savings were in their stock, their 401k plans, and then all of a sudden the companies are, brought those plans down to nothing because they were vested in their own stock, and so it wasn't just that they got stock options that were worth a whole bunch of money and then were worth nothing. It's that their life savings.
They woke up one day and they're part of a startup.
There are a lot of examples of that.
Yeah.
I wanted to go deeper into a certain topic that just. All right, I'll come back to the one because I lost my mind. But the other topic, we talked about you're the head of global now, but we didn't talk about how you got there. We didn't, how you joined the firm, how you progressed, and how you ended up being in charge of the global digital infrastructure portfolio.
So I went to Carlisle, CRG West, and then the great financial crisis happened, and the billions that we were going to invest, quickly got. In fact, I working with Tom Ray, who
Yes.
we prepared for this big presentation to a gentleman I believe is still at one of the senior people at Carlisle, Rob Stuckey, who happened to be a Nebraska guy. Played at Lincoln, and a high school teammate of mine, Jim Scow, followed him at Lincoln, and Jim went on to play in the NFL. But Rob was a very kind of stoic person, and so preparing for weeks. This is the plan. This is where we're going to invest, and we're 10 minutes into the meeting, and Rob holds it up, and all the Carlisle folks have a pedigree very different than mine with MIT and Harvard, et cetera. And I'll never forget it, Dan, that they said, look, this financial thing is going to get far worse than people know. And they went on to predict many of the banks that failed. And I'm sitting there like, you guys got to be kidding me, right? This is the end of the world. But anyway, Rob said, look, we're putting everything on hold. And of course, they did the right thing, but there wasn't a gig for me to do. So I hung around a little bit after that, took some time off, and then ultimately got into the commercial real estate space, went to work for Grubb & Ellis, was talking to CB, but the thing didn't work. And I had some success at Grubb, took a couple of big accounts, and miraculously, CB said, yeah, all right, we can find room for you. And I had known a lot of the CB leadership because when we worked together at Level 3, we were a very sizable client of the firms and really great people. So they brought me on 15 and a half years ago to do a role in North America. Flash forward, we bought the network business. We had a significant amount of success. 4 or 5 years ago, we
say you bought the network business.
I'm sorry, the NEF, Mike Murphy's business, layered that in, started talking about the concept of digital infrastructure.
And did you drive the NEF?
Yeah. That was, it was apparent that even before AI developed, the opportunities, because if you think about our clients, Dan, it's not the corporate real estate client. It's the IT, it's the data, for the hyperscalers, they have their own division that does the data center work. And if it's the banks, we're working with the IT leaders not necessarily the real estate folks. Oftentimes they're not in the room. So we needed other people that spoke that language, and we needed to do more than just real estate data centers. So Mike and that team coming over was a great move, and not only for that business as it exists as a standalone, but to support the broader business within CB. So brought them in and expanded the role to global. The hyperscale business has taken off. You think about the transition from the investors in the space. They're the biggest customers of CB. I talk about it in the context of going with my fellow line of business leaders. You think about retail, industrial, office. You go see the big PE firms, and conceptually, they walk in the door and go to the right and see the real estate guys, and I go to the left and see the infrastructure guys who tend to have significantly more capital to invest in the real estate, particularly in these days. So it's been a great move, and the company's very supportive of what we're doing, and I've talked openly in our earnings recently about the growth of the data center space, and interestingly enough, I'm very proud of Omaha, as you know, and our CEO. Bob Salentic grew up in Council Bluffs. His father was an executive at Mutual of Omaha, and he went to a competing parochial school on the other side of the river. So and he got a computer science degree from Iowa State, which he reminds me, what he doesn't say is, because he's a pretty humble guy, is he also got an MBA from Harvard. And I said, Bob, anytime you want back in the data center space, I'd probably have a role for you. But it's much like Level 3 and Zayo. We've got a really great leadership team that's thinking ahead of beyond just traditional real estate, and in the cycles we've gone through the last few years, thankfully we've done that, and so
we
may
said
now.
Your team has a lot of people you worked with over the years. Is that right?
Yeah. So our leader in Europe is a gentleman by the name of Andrew J. Andrew and his colleague and partner at the time, Matt Pullen, who left and was a part of CyrusOne and some other great data center businesses. They supported us in all of our work in London, whether it was the Brom Street or our big office address, I forget where there, but working with our friend Colin and the team over there. So now, 30 years later, we're colleagues and very good friends. And similarly, when we were doing stuff in Asia, I remember a story. Vincent Latifier was our Asia director. Worked with Steve Liddell, hired him. It was a great hire, and I remember having to go over there because there was literally, they say the ship had left the dock. Well, the ship had left the dock, and we hadn't secured the landing station yet. I don't know if I ever told. Probably kept this out of your realm because we got it solved. But flew to Hong Kong, took a cab, walked down, literally cows, and there's this temple that's maybe the traditional Oriental temple with the roof, and there was a guy weaving a net, and he was the guy that controlled the temple. And Vincent said, pointed to the water and said, that's where the cable's coming. And that's the guy you're going to write a check to. And that was part of paying homage, but we got the cable landed. And those, all those deals were just so fun to do. And those, people are still friends to this day, much like you and I and the colleagues we've met. So it was a good run.
No, it's great. No, you've always been one of the most liked guys in the industry. Everyone who knows you and has worked with you has thought super highly of you. So that's one of the reasons I was so excited to have you here on the Rear Roars.
Yeah.
Oh, I know what I was going to ask you earlier. Ron Vidal, do you keep in touch with Ron Vidal?
I do.
You do? Because I would love to get Ron on the podcast, but I have not kept in touch with him. I heard he might have moved back to Denver.
He was here. Hopefully, what a great guy, first of all. Yeah. So he's a little bit of a nomad. Hopefully he won't. But he was in town. He was living here for a little bit. His daughter was, or maybe still is here. He's got a fire recovery business that's very successful. I believe he is on the board of Burning Man now, which is classic Ron. He has something to do.
He should come out to Boulder.
He's got something to do with that. He was living in Portland. He pinged me, and I think on LinkedIn, and said, hey, I'm in town. And so I met him at a coffee shop, and there's this old bus out front of the coffee shop. And he says, and he starts telling me a story. So I'm traveling the country, and I've got this bus, whatever. Well, apparently it was Rick Springfield's touring bus. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right? And I'm doing a tour. He's renovating it, and he looks great. He's still got his hands in 100 different things. So he would be great for this podcast.
Yeah, I would love to get him to share his memories, because he like you has a different set of memories, because of what he was doing was separated from what I was doing, but he was close to Jim and involved in some of the, probably more interesting, crazy stories that were coming out of some of those key periods. So, yeah,
I'll take that as a follow-up. But yeah,
right,
he would be amazing, and he looks great. He's doing great. I think life's been good to him.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Anything we haven't touched on that you were hoping I was going to take us to?
Well, thanks for having me. I think this next phase of the industry and our careers, depending on how, hopefully we're not quite working as hard as at least I am. I know you're still working hard as much as for you it's not, but I just think it's fascinating. I mean, maybe the piece for me is, I've been fortunate to have 4 kids, and 2 of them and maybe a third are tied to the digital infrastructure space.
Oh, really?
So when I think about, when people ask me, is there still room to go? I say, well, if I didn't think so, I certainly wouldn't have the kids, looking at opportunities in the space. So that's kind of fun.
Oh, yeah. There's no question that digital infrastructure has a lot in its future. It's funny because I wrote the book as if the story of bandwidth ended when my journey as a CEO sort of ended, but in reality, it's going to go on for another 50 years, taking on different lives and forms, and maybe other boom chapters, maybe other bust chapters. Who knows? But the story of digital infrastructure is far from over.
And again, I mentioned it earlier, but how fortunate are we to have been a part of that? Yours obviously much greater than mine, but I can't imagine, being here at 61 years old and thinking about having done anything else. I'm just so fortunate and blessed. And thanks for having me.
Although that NFL career that you didn't have, that might have been a good journey too.
that would have been short-lived and didn't get out of high school, but it was.
What was your position in football?
I was a quarterback.
You were a quarterback?
Yeah.
When was the last time you got out there and threw a ball?
I have 2 boys. We could still throw it around a little bit, but I was a high school quarterback for a moderate team, but it was great memories as well. And so
my last touchdown catch and my last touchdown pass were about 7 years ago, and pickup game that involved my kid and his friends and some of my.
Well, you're way better than me, my friend. I haven't. I couldn't even tell you when the last one was. Couldn't even tell you. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. This has been fantastic.
Dan.
I appreciate you doing this.
My pleasure.
All
Thanks
right.
so
A lot
much.
of people whose journeys our paths have crossed are going to benefit from hearing these stories. So
I hope so. Thanks for having
me. I'm excited.
All right, buddy.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe on your listening platform. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Kendall Weinberg with support from Gibson Siegert.